Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 40th Annual Public Interest Environmental Law Conference. Thank you for attending this panel, which will explore sustainability initiatives in the wine industry. My name is Kat Loden. I am a conference co-director, and I will be moderating this panel. I would also like to welcome and thank the University of Oregon's Wine Tasting Club, May It Please the Cork, for co-sponsoring this event. I just have a few announcements, and then we'll get started. Don't worry if you can't see yourself. This is a Zoom webinar, so all of the attendees are automatically muted with videos off. You'll only be able to see the panelists. Throughout the panel, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A function rather than the chat function. All of our panelists will give a presentation, and then there will be a 15-minute Q&A session at the end. Additionally, if there are any legal professionals in the audience wishing to use CLE credit, I will be sharing a link to register for the CLE credit in a moment. Also, our alumni board, Friends of Land, Air, Water, helps provide summer stipends for students doing unpaid public interest environmental law internships. If you're interested in making a donation to help provide students with these stipends, information on how to do so will also be in a Google document that I will share shortly. Lastly, the University of Oregon is located on the traditional indigenous homeland of the Kalapuya people. Following treaties between 1851 and 1855, the Kalapuya people were dispossessed of their indigenous homeland by the United States government and forcibly removed to the Coast Reservation in Western Oregon. Today, descendants are citizens of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Juan Community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians of Oregon, and continue to make important contributions in their communities at UO and across the land we now refer to as Oregon. PILC would like to acknowledge the traditional homelands of the Kalapuya people in the Willamette Valley and to express our respect for the tribal nations of Oregon. I will now introduce the panelists. Simmone Landau is a current student at the University of Oregon School of Law. She is a former wine industry professional with a Bachelor's of Science in Viticulture, Enology, and Plant Science from Cornell University. She has done research in viticulture and hard cider apple production and has experience in both the laboratory and industrial settings of custom crush and estate wineries across the US and abroad. Deandra Anderson grew up in the Central Valley of California, where wine was constantly present. She studied international wine business at the College of Geisenheim and worked in wine production and wine marketing in the US and Germany. Currently, she lives in Germany and recently founded a sustainable wine packaging business called Ebb and Flow Kegs. As someone who has worked in wine all over the world, she has seen sustainable considerations everywhere from vineyards to the bottle shop. Finally, Andy McVay was born and raised in Hillsboro, Oregon, and graduated from Oregon State University in 2003 with a BS in food and fermentation science and a minor in chemistry. For the last 19 vintages, Andy worked in commercial wine production as a winemaking since 2015. Andy has worked with alternative packaging, kegs since 2004 and cans since 2017, and with live winery certification program. He transitioned away from winemaking in November 2021 while pursuing a diploma from the Wine and Spirits Education Trust and working at the Wine Cellar and Sales and Education, where there's a platform to advocate for sustainability in wine. With that, I will pass it over to the panelists.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction, Kat. Well, I think I speak for all of us when I say that we're really excited to be here today talking about this. There are a lot of different sectors in the wine industry to discuss sustainability in. There's room for improvement everywhere from the vineyard all the way to distribution. And we have some amazing people here today to talk with me about some of those things. Specifically, I have a lot of experience on the viticultural side of things, and there are a lot of technological advances that have made sustainability and everything from reduction of pesticide overspray to conservation of water in the vineyard. A lot of the challenges in that area are the application because of the cost barriers for the farmers growing grapes. But what we have here today is a lot of expertise with my co-panelists on the specifically wine packaging side.
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in. My name is Deandra, as Kat already introduced. Thanks again for inviting me, Simmone, to be a part of this. This is super awesome that this exists. I had never even heard about this conference, and I think it's fantastic that it's already the 40th year. which is pretty unbelievable. From my side, yeah, packaging is kind of what is the fundament of my business that I founded last year. I'm based in Frankfurt, Germany, and trying to bring wine and kegs and other craft beverages to the market in reusable stainless steel kegs, which isn't really widely used in Europe. Generally speaking, as it is in other markets like the United States, Australia, even in the UK, you see it in different places, but that's what we're trying to build, is the infrastructure to make it accessible to producers, because as you mentioned with viticulture and implementing new sustainable technology, there is a cost barrier to that. And that's kind of what we are trying to create, is the infrastructure to be able to rent kegs to producers and then also offer them a place to sell their products through us in our distribution. So yeah, we're just at the beginning. But yeah, the first time I saw kegs was actually, working in the United States at different wineries. And I thought that this was something that has to be, expanded to other markets. And I think Andy also, as we chatted the other day about it, has many more years of experience with kegging wine. And maybe you can add a few comments just about your experience with kegs.
Yeah, right on. I'm super excited to be here. Sustainability is a passion of mine, especially in the wine industry, and it's really fun to be able to participate on this panel with all of you. My experience in sustainable winemaking, it stretches from viticulture to packaging to sales and communication. And I think I have a unique perspective on putting wine in kegs going back to 2004. I worked for a winery called Edgefield. It's the McMenamins winery out in Troutdale, Oregon. McMenamins is a Northwest restaurant chain. It's unique to the Northwest, and they produce and keg and serve a lot of wine by the glass in their restaurants. And a lot of this happens behind the scenes. So many by the glass sales, I think, in a restaurant, people don't realize that a by the glass sale could come from a bottle, it could come from a bag-in-box or a can or a keg. And much of the time in a by the glass situation, you don't need the traditional aesthetic of a bottle of wine. And I worked for 4 years for the McMenamins winery as the cellar master, and we packaged thousands of gallons of wine in keg. And it was a great and efficient program. We cleaned all the kegs and filled them and distributed them. And it's a great system, very integrated between the producer and the distributor and the customer. And so I think that's a great example of a Northwest focused brand that is putting a lot of wine in keg.
Just to kind of give a little bit of background, I'm sure most everyone here has experience with traditional wine packaging. So what we're talking about when we talk about alternatives is you typically have your glass bottle and it has to have a cork, and it oftentimes has foil. And there is a lot of resources that go into fine tuning that wine and then bottling it in that manner. And Deandra has there, and one of the alternative solutions we've been discussing, that is a keg. I presume there's no wine in it. Otherwise, you're really, really strong, Deandra.
It actually, we had a kombucha in it. So this will only ever be used again for kombucha, obviously, due to the different strains of yeast in microbiology. But yeah, we use this 10-liter keg for kombucha.
Yeah, so this is in opposition to the traditional glass bottling. Some other alternatives include boxed wine, which is, I think, what Andy referred to as bag-in-a-box, as well as canned wine, and then, of course, kegs, which we've been discussing quite a lot of. And Deandra is kind of a little bit of an expert on how this is sustainable, actually. Could you talk a little bit about some of the research that your company looked into?
Yeah, so the last 2 years, to be able to fund our idea and to develop it further, We applied for different scholarships, which came from the German government and which required us to work with our university, Hochschule Geisenheim, where there's so many experts on enology, but also the packaging of the product and logistics surrounding wine. And there we actually wrote an article just explaining the differences of the wine packaging that you mentioned. So PET, key kegs, which is a single-use plastic keg, reusable stainless steel kegs, aluminum cans as well, and of course the traditional glass bottle. And they're just analyzing in which format and in which spaces these packaging formats are good to have, and also what's more sustainable. And obviously what it comes down to is the distance that these packages are traveling from once they're produced to going to the producers themselves and then to the market. And obviously for us as a company to be able to communicate that we're offering a more sustainable solution, we did a CO2 footprint analysis between single-use glass bottles, reusable stainless steel kegs, and as well as the key keg. And what came out of this CO2 analysis was that we can reduce 40% of the CO2 output, which is approximately 17.6 kilograms of CO2. In comparison, or by using one 20-liter stainless steel keg in a normal sort of circulation within the German market. So going from the producer to the market and then coming back to us to be cleaned in comparison to the single-use glass bottle. That's one study we did last year, and then this year we're already planning to, since we're more on the market, we're expanding. We are also going to conduct a life cycle assessment to really just analyze where we're putting out CO2 as a business. I think that's extremely important to, not just for communications and marketing, obviously, but also to find ways to become more efficient. Obviously, it costs money to do these kinds of analyses, but from our perspective as a younger company and young business owners who do think climate change is real and want to change some things, this is something we definitely find to be extremely important.
Yeah, so that is some really cool research that you have been doing. In terms of what Andy's been doing, I was hoping you could talk a little bit about, some of your hashtags and other passions.
Sure. Well, playing off the idea that a kegged wine is a more efficient packaging option, and it's a really great option in situations where we don't need a traditional format to please the customer's expectations. A lot of wine packaging comes with customers' expectations, the belief that the traditional package of a bottle is the best format for what the customer is going to expect, or like one that that's what the customer wants. And because we think that's what the customer wants, we keep providing that to the customer, that there's this aesthetic value with this consistent presentation. And one of the things that comes with bottle finished wine is a foil on the top. And the foil, it comes with cork finished bottles, and the foil is the capsule, the thing that you cut off the top that covers and originally protected the cork. Back in the day, bottles used to be stored in places that rats and insects could get to, and they would gnaw on the corks or burrow into them. And so the capsule was a great way to protect the cork. Also, people would use it for authenticate to prove the origin.
Authentication of the origin.
Thank you. I don't know. I'm stumbling over that. So yeah, the origin of the bottle, like the producer put all the package in there, and the original wine is still in there. So these days we have great storage for wine. We don't have to worry about rodents and insects getting to the cork, and we have other ways to prove that the winery has put the wine in there and that their closure is sound. Particularly branded corks is a great way for that. And also the number of wines that we're concerned about being fabricated or copied or repackaged with less expensive or not the original wine is really rare. So the need for foils, this expectation, this traditional package of putting a foil over a cork closed bottle isn't needed anymore. It's like a vestigial tale of old world packaging. So foil-free wines, hashtag foil-free wines is a hashtag that I've started in social media. It's very new, and I'm new to social media as well. But I think that this idea that if the consumer can get past a foil on the bottle, it's like if there's not a foil there, it's easier to get the bottle open, and it decreases cost, it decreases consumption, and it makes things more accessible to the consumer. So I think that's like number one when I think about a path to sustainability: reduce, reuse, recycle. The first step is to reduce. So if we get rid of the foil, that's a good step. In addition to that, the screw cap industry is a great alternative to foils, or to cork closed bottles, because corks sometimes have variability and sometimes they aren't the best seal. So screw caps came along to make a more consistent closure. But screw caps really only need to just get onto the bottle, and they don't need everything that's left over on the bottom of the bottle. If you look at a screw cap bottle, you take the cap off the bottle, everything that's left there isn't needed. Like 50% of the screw cap is waste, only for aesthetics to copy the presentation of a foil finished bottle. So I think this idea that the traditional package is needed, it isn't so true anymore. And we can reduce our consumption by getting rid of the foil and by switching to a screw cap with no remaining material on the bottle. So those are two steps that I'm trying to lobby the industry and advocate for more sustainability. Thanks for the question, Simmone.
Yeah, so I think that's a really good example of how difficult it is to accomplish change in an industry that is the consumer is so incredibly steeped in tradition. So even just getting the closure to change is a huge step. So what we're talking about with Deandra's business with wine and kegs, that's a radical change. It exists as it stands today. It exists in a lot of places. You can get wine on tap in various bars, like wine bars have a lot of wine on tap and things like that. But in terms of actually making that kind of change completely vertically, like Andy was saying, vertical integration is one of the really good options for making that happen. And if some business has control over everything from production to distribution, that's a really good opportunity for us to capitalize on sustainability. But if you don't have that kind of vertical integration, we run into challenges at every step of the process, because everyone in the wine industry is averse to change for various reasons. I think I'm really excited about essentially my generation, I think mine and Deandra's generation, because we're not particularly averse to change. But the corresponding challenge there that has been brought up to me on multiple occasions is that because wine is so traditional, it's sort of more ideologically inaccessible. So there's not as many wine drinkers in our generation because it doesn't exist in as high volume in the kind of packaging and accessibility that we're talking about today. So I think another challenge is introducing these kind of sustainable wine packaging options to the younger generation. But of course, you can't introduce them to a new consumer base if you don't already have a consumer base to cater to. There's just not the money to make it happen. So we're running into a lot of challenges, but there is so much promise. So I think we were talking a little bit about platforms for being able to get people on board with these sustainable packaging items. And the pandemic has made it very difficult, actually. I don't know if either of you wanted to elaborate on that. I know Deandra has some personal experience.
Yeah, I mean, before, so let's say BC, before Corona, our main focus was the idea of, having a drink truck, that it would just be filled with kegs and taps, and then we drive to a music festival, or we, are out on the street kind of thing, selling wine directly to end consumers, or, we're at your local concert venue and wine would then be served on tap there, where just things are flowing. And then obviously the pandemic came, and we had to kind of pivot our concept actually, and we developed and found partners of places that were still allowed to be open, like wine shops, where then we would roll in a mobile tap station, and people could, we named it BYOB, so bring your own bottle concept, where you can fill your own wine, pay for it obviously, and then take it home with you, and then you could reuse your own bottles. So kind of meeting the customer in a different place. That was something that it was just the only way we could test our concept last year. And luckily we had two partners here in Frankfurt where we're based, but then also in Berlin, that, promoted this and sold lots of wine actually that way. And, it was kind of the entry for wine on tap for us. But obviously we do find that the different format for a lot of people at the beginning is very like, whoa, what is that? Why are you tapping wine? It's not beer, super strange to see. Is the quality the same? So there's definitely just a lack of understanding of tapping, the process of tapping and kegging beverages in general. And then of course, we then back it up with different studies that have been conducted at the university when it comes to storing wine in kegs for longer periods. We were able to offer a bachelor student to be able to write their thesis about this, which then we're able to use this data that he collected, both qualitative and quantitative, to then say, hey guys, like this is, approved, these are the numbers. There's no difference really for the wine. You can store wine in kegs for so long, XYZ, and really just kind of, beating people over the head a little bit, I guess, with data and facts, which I feel like right now a lot of people have their own facts and stuff and such, but like that's kind of where we always come from, the more like academic, scientific point of view. And then also just letting people try it and tapping wine themselves, I think, and also saying, hey, you can bring your own bottle and you can reuse that bottle. Hey, you have an old wine bottle with a screw cap, wash it out, bring it to the shop, fill your own wine, and then you can use that bottle and you're already doing a little bit more. And people really like the concept because they can try wines, buy the glass as well at the shop before they buy, which in other cases you can't. And also smaller formats. We offered 0.5 liter as opposed to 0.75, and people loved that because it's a smaller quantity, which is already kind of like a market trend anyways. But I don't know, I think for us, trying to go against the more conservative point of view that you can only sell wine in glass bottles, we found that you just kind of have to educate people, don't shame people about, giving them the facts about, oh, it's not very environmentally friendly or it's whatever. But just nicely, trying to warm people up to the concept, I think. And maybe Andy, you have something more to add with maybe cans or with also wine on top.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like your points about providing wines in smaller packages so people can try things. And wine on tap is a great way to do that. Wines really hold up pretty well to repackaging. So if you go to a growler station and fill a bottle, or go to a restaurant that has a by the bottle option, if you're drinking that wine within 2 to 3 days, it's not a problem. And if you keep it cold and sealed in a full bottle, it could easily hold up to a week. At the wine cellar where I work, we have weekly tastings on Thursday where people can pick up 5 samples of wine that we filled that day, and they try them that night. They'd be good for another 2 days. And people get small amounts of wine to try before they buy them, and they can do it from home. And repackaging wine works really pretty well, especially if the bottle is full. In Portland, there's a location called Cooper's Hall that has a number of wines on tap that you can bring your bottle to. I think that we probably have viewers from a lot of different places here. So I think that the idea that in your community, there's going to be a station to fill a container and bring wine home is definitely there. In Oregon, there's a law passed that wine can be sold at growler stations. So it's really going to take some customer interest to build more of that network up. But it's definitely an option. As far as more alternative packaging, wine in cans has been around for quite a while, but not with as much presence as we've had since about 2015 or so. I started working with producing and packaging wine in cans in 2017, and we did a lot of research for every year past 2017, figuring out what's the shelf life of wine in cans, how suitable is the package to quality control. And what we found was that cans actually are, when you put wine in a package, it always picks up some sort of oxygen, and the oxygen deteriorates the wine. Ultimately, oxygen is what leads to spoilage for wine. And the headspace, the amount of a bottle that's not full has some sort of gas in it. And we hope that it's nitrogen or argon or some inert gas that will keep the wine stable. But there's always a little bit of oxygen, and that's usually incorporated into the wine. The more headspace you have in a package, the more potential for oxidation or spoilage. And with cans, the top of the can is kind of indented and it sits down into the wine. And that displaces a lot of the headspace. And what we found was the packaging, the oxygen uptake in wine when we fill cans is like half that of corks or screw cap finished bottles. And so we were finding less packaging damage to the wine. And as a result, we needed less sulfites to counteract the oxidation from packaging. Sulfites, the antimicrobial or antioxidant component that a lot of wineries use to keep wine more stable. Generally, the sulfite level is increased at packaging to compensate for the oxygen. The antioxidant pushes the oxygen down. Well, if you have less oxygen, you need less sulfite. So cans are a better quality control component as far as a package for oxidation in wine. I thought that was awesome. They also come in smaller format. So like what Deandra was saying, you can have wine that's more accessible. It's less expensive. It's in a smaller package. It's lighter. It recycles more easily, and you can take it all over the place. A lot of places don't allow glass in for beverage, so you can take it to concert venues, and they're great for hotels and stocking or kayak and backpacking adventures, or just like if you want less weight to pack into your car for your weekend trip, cans are awesome. My spouse and I use them if we want 2 different wines at the table and we don't want wine left over. 2 cans are a really good option. So cans are great for quality control. Wineries have to customize their winemaking style to match the can, particularly because customers are generally expecting that cans are ready to consume right away. So the style of wine is like an early consumption wine. But cans are absolutely, if you put good wine in, you'll get good wine out. They're more affordable, they're more accessible, and our recycling infrastructure is way better for cans than glass right now. I'm happy to, once we get past the reduce and reuse and talk about the recycling component of sustainability in wine, I'd like to address bottles, but I've been talking a little bit. So Simmone, with your background in, I think that you said that you worked a little bit in viticulture. Would you like to talk about sustainability in viticulture?
Yeah, sure. Like I said, there is so many technological advances that exist because viticulture it's just farming. That's actually one of the things that drew me to study wine in the first place. Is I think that winemaking is one of the most unique industries that I'm going to come across, just because it is farming, but also it's farming that people who don't typically take an interest in farming are interested in. It gets people who live literally in New York City to leave the city and come out and wander around on a farm. So that's sustainability in winemaking is so interesting to me because there's so much opportunity to introduce such a wide range of people to it. But in terms of viticulture, so there are a number of movements in terms of grape growing and farming in general that are centered around sustainability. And the two things that come to mind are biodynamic and organic certifications. Organic, at least in the US, I don't know if this is the same in Germany, but organic has a standardized certification. There are standards that people have to meet. And the idea behind that is a lot less synthetics. And so when people purchase something with an organic stamp, oftentimes what they think they're getting is something that hasn't been touched by pesticides and that is made more sustainably. And in some cases, that's true. The problem with organics is that it's standardized across the United States. And what isn't standardized are the climates and the varietals of grapes and the soil composition. So the requirements for organics are the same across the board, and the application of it is ineffective in some places. So, for example, one of the most commonly used organic pesticides is copper. And that works pretty well in California, where it is dry and you don't have to deal with a lot of fungal diseases because there's not a lot of humidity. But when you go, specifically, I like to say that if you're a grape grower in California, I'm not impressed. Tell me that you make good wine in Pennsylvania, then we'll talk. So I actually spent a lot of time on the East Coast. That's where I did my undergrad. And then I also worked at a vineyard in Pennsylvania where I was doing a little bit of research with the University of Pennsylvania. But over in Pennsylvania, it's incredibly humid. So you get a lot of fungal diseases. So you have to spray a lot more. And there actually have been some studies that show in an attempt to meet the standards for organic certification, farmers have actually ended up with copper toxicity in their soil from having to spray it so much. So the organics are a good option, again, frequently in California, but the standardization means that it is not necessarily the solution that we're looking for in terms of sustainable farming. Biodynamics is sort of a subset of organics, and it requires a lot more biodiversity, essentially. It's actually really interesting. It was pioneered by Rudolf Steiner, who I believe is German. And he actually didn't believe in science at all. He believed in being one with the earth. And so it actually, biodynamics are kind of taking off really well here in Oregon, because we have a lot of people who are in tune with the earth. But yeah, so it requires a lot more biodiversity in terms of what types of, it has a more holistic approach. So like what types of plants that you're growing on your farm, how many different types of animals you have, that sort of thing. I think it's kind of fun because there's some wonky things that you have to do, like bury manure in a cow's horn under a specific moon and leave it there and then dig it up a year later, also under a specific moon. And that gives you your fertilizer tea in terms of making the fertilizer that you're going to apply to your farm. So that has actually, there have been a lot of studies on biodynamics that have shown that it actually has a really positive impact on the soil composition. So even though it's not, it didn't originate being backed by science, there's a lot of science backing it up nowadays. And I think that the component of it that requires sort of a biodiversity and a holistic view of the entire system. Plus, there's a lot of options for switching things out. It's kind of like a mix and match. While everything in biodynamics isn't necessarily, some of it's kind of extraneous. There's a lot of studies being done to kind of pare down what about it is important. But all the options that you get, I think, is a better approach for what we're looking for in terms of how to keep things sustainable, as opposed to organics, which is like a standardized approach. One of the things that I did research on that's required in biodynamics is cover crop. So in vineyards, I assume everybody here who's interested in wine has seen what a vineyard looks like. You have your rows of vines, and there is typically grass or something in between them, but then underneath them, it's oftentimes bare. And that's to essentially keep plants from competing with the vines. And that's usually accomplished by spraying or by mechanical disruption, or something along those lines, just to kill everything that's not a vine. But we were experimenting with growing cover crops. So something that, well, we did some low growing. So like some spreading plants and some not low growing plants, which were quite difficult to work with, and I don't recommend them, but it actually ended up with a healthier soil composition that ultimately ended up benefiting the vines, so long as they weren't particularly deep rooted cover crops. And the cool thing about that was that it works really, really well with native plants. So it's very customizable, and it can be really helpful for things like promoting the bee population, which is what we ended up doing with clover. So that's one of the aspects of viticultural sustainability that I think is becoming more and more popular. At least on the East Coast, it's very easy to do because they're constantly trying to keep the ground bare. But in California, it also has a potential for a huge benefit because there's so much bare soil in California. Oftentimes there's not even vegetation between the rows, much less under the vines. So adding vegetation as a cover crop underneath vastly increases the organic matter and water retention of the soil. So there's a lot of multifaceted opportunities in viticulture. But again, it's a lot of farmers. And so there's cost barriers, there's education barriers, because they're scattered out in completely rural areas. And so I love farmers who seek out academics to work with them. It's so mutually beneficial, but most farmers don't have access to that kind of partnership. So oftentimes they don't learn about these things, or they don't know how to implement them, or various things. So once again, education is a huge barrier there.
I think that's a great point about farmers getting involved with a certification that allows them to communicate and educate with other farmers. And I think there's a concept in sustainable wine growing. A lot of farmers will say, I farm sustainably, but I'm not certified, or I'm farming organically, but I'm not getting the certification. And I appreciate farmers who manage themselves and make sure that they're doing right for their farm, because like Simmone, like you said, organic certification is a fairly broad approach to sustainability, and it's not always catered to a region or a farm that's very specific. So I think having some adaptability in your sustainable certification is important. I think getting farmers out there, I think getting your farm certified is really important, because it forces you to have third-party verification. It forces you to continue to educate yourself. Many of these certifications require that you're doing better for your employees also, and having somebody to check in on you and help you and coach you along the way is really important. It also gives you the option it also gives the winery the option to say that this is made with sustainably farmed grapes, organic grapes, biodynamic grapes. Live is a Northwest specific certification called Low Input Viticulture and Enology. Live originated in Oregon in the 90s. And these certifications are really important, and getting your crops certified and getting it on the label so customers can see it is important. Doing your own thing and not telling anybody doesn't really help the infrastructure of education. Doing something, certifying it, and telling everybody that you did it, that's great, especially when it's in sustainability. Like, I want to know everybody's sustainable practices. So I think what happens behind the scenes isn't broadcasted enough these days. And the work in biodynamics and organic viticulture, a couple of things that I really like about those practices is they require a portion of the farm to be reserved for non-monoculture, and Live does this as well. Many of them have standards of 15 to 25% minimum of your farm needs to be a place that you're not running a tractor on, that you're not interrupting the earth, that it's a space that you're allowing your ecosystem to evolve in. And the work with cover crops supporting pollinators is really important. The Live program worked with Oregon State University to develop a wildflower seed mix that was sold to vineyards and wineries, and then they could repackage it and sell it to their customers. And the idea was to have this whole corridor up and down the Northwest through vineyards to allow pollinators from like a lily pad to leap from one farm to the next. And this was really important. Back in the Northwest, there's oak savannas. And before we cleared out all the oaks, we had this native habitat to allow butterflies in particular as a pollinator corridor. And now that those are interrupted, we're not getting our transfer of animals as easily. So even in our backyards, we can set up wildflower mixes. Like if you took your backyard and instead of mowing all the grass, you just allocated a certain portion of it to wildflowers, just like quarantine that off and make it part of a natural ecosystem for pollinators to come in. And if every farm and every backyard had a space for pollinators, we would have this highway for animals to travel up the Northwest and get into more biodiversity. I think that's great. So working with these certification systems requires third-party verification. It has somebody come into your farm, coach you through it. Then the winery can put that information on the label and the customer can see it. And I think that's a mission accomplished for sustainability.
And Andy, so you've worked in marketing in the past. I was wondering if you had anything to add about how to market those kinds of products and how successful it is.
Yeah, I think marketing wine, I think we need to do some new things in marketing and wine because so much of marketing is built on what's been successful in the past. And specifically, when I've worked with distributors, I've said, I think that we shouldn't use foils on bottles anymore. And the distributors say, foils mean added value. The customer thinks it's a fancier product and worth more money. You have to put foils on a bottle. And I said, well, I think that we need to value sustainability. Let's say the most sustainable product or the least consuming package is added value because there's a customer out there who wants that. And distributors need to recognize that. So marketers need to know that customers want a more sustainable product, like having a bottle that weighs twice as much or extra packaging that you have to throw away to get to the cork isn't really helping the consumer or the backs of the people who package the wine or the resources that we have to use to make bottles. And marketers have all of that potential. Like so much of what we do on a farm is reserved to the farm. So much of what we do in the winery is hidden in the cellar. So much of what we put on the package, all the consumers see. So if you put sustainability on your package, cans, no foils, less consumption screw caps, lighter bottles, certified, grown with certified grapes on the label, all that information the customer gets to see. The customer gets to make the decision once you tell them what's valuable. And I think winery marketing departments and distributors, especially because the U.S. is controlled by third-party distribution, those sales and marketing representatives control that communication. So what I've seen is a hesitancy to embrace sustainable packaging because the tradition is a heavier bottle, more packaging comes with more value. And the customer wants to like see that value, even if it's like a less expensive bottle of wine, if it has a foil and a heavier bottle, the customer will be more excited about it. So marketing is so essential to, if we prioritize sustainability in marketing, the consumer will see it and know how to consume less. Thanks for that question. So to kick it over to Deandra, when you're working, so much of your work is putting wine in keg that goes to like an on-premise or a restaurant or something that's not always customer facing. When you're working with restaurants, what have been some of your challenges convincing them to go with wine in a keg rather than wine in a bottle?
Honestly, just like the actual equipment, the first investment that they have to make to even have a tap or some way to actually serve the wine. A lot of traditional restaurants maybe don't have a tap system for even beer or something like this. So that first investment, which costs a bit of money at the beginning to get started, I think that's like the first investment that people have to make. But then, yeah, just telling them and showing them the numbers that, hey, this is a return on investment in the long run. this is actually way easier and quicker in the service aspect. Actually, you can serve products quicker. You don't have to deal with the empty bottles at the end of a shift that you then have to take. At least in Germany, we have like recycling containers on the corners that you don't have to, you know, pay somebody whatever the wage is per hour to take those bottles out, or have to take the car to take out those bottles, because a lot of places that are really pumping wine, you have to go every day after a shift or at the beginning of a shift, and that's time. It's space in your storage room. Even if you have a storage room in Europe, a lot of the times you don't even have something like that, just because smaller spaces generally. And then also just being able to offer something different. That's kind of how we approach people, is to say, hey, once you make this investment, you can save time, you can serve products quicker, and you can also have, you know, maybe a better conscience, which, you know, right now with most restaurants and gastronomy bars, you know, they've been closed, they've had a rough couple, you know, years at this point. So they're just trying to, if they're still around, to be able to open their doors again and to greet guests and to stay in business. So that's also something that we're communicating, is like, yes, it's an investment right now, maybe not the best time, but it is something that in the long run can save you money, personnel costs as well, and space and stinky, dirty bottles that are laying around at the end of the night. But I did want to add something also about marketing lighter packaging formats and whatnot. For instance, in Sweden, they have an alcohol monopoly, Systembolaget or Bolaget, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but and also the Swedish government has like regulated, so basically anything that's over 5%, you have to buy it through this alcohol monopoly. They have different stores around Sweden. There's also importers and whatnot, but they really have put sustainability at the top of their priority list, and therefore they've created like packaging taxes based on weight. So if you're importing alcoholic beverages into Sweden, and you know, it's in a 1 kilo glass bottle, you're going to get charged a little bit more than you would if you were to maybe have a 300-gram glass bottle or something like this. And as well as like bag and box, that's definitely super popular in Scandinavia. One, for the price quality ratio, but also the weight. A lot of the Swedes have boats, or they have houses up north in the wilderness, and they go there, and the last thing they want to do is to pack, you know, 6 bottles of wine. Instead, they can, you know, pack a bag and box, 3 liter, 5 liter, or something like this, and then they can just toss it in the bin. The cardboard goes in the cardboard, and the plastic bag goes into the plastic recycling bin. And so that's also, you know, a way that the government has legislated to promote lighter packages, alternative packages to the glass bottle, and really promoting also, when you go into Systembolaget to buy alcohol, they have like these little green signs that say it's organic, right? So that they're like, hey, end consumer, this is organic, this is a lighter package, this is like a green star. I think they have like a little green leaf kind of thing to really let the end consumer know that this product is maybe better for the environment. Which I think a lot of people obviously wouldn't like that, because then they would feel like that their product, if it doesn't have these green leaves on them, that it's maybe at a disadvantage. But for them, it's like, no, we want to promote sustainability. That's something of our government at this point, and how they communicate it is through this alcohol monopoly and the different tenders that they offer for their portfolio, which I mean, I think is, yeah, radical in its own way. But yeah, I think that's, I mean, from my perspective, always, I think that we can always, the government should regulate a little bit more if we really do want to achieve our 2030 and 2050 goals. It's one thing for the private industry. I mean, obviously I own my own business. I am a private company, and I am doing my part, and if not more than a lot of other companies that are selling the same products that I'm selling. But it would be really great if the government were to be like, hey, you can no longer, you know, ship your glass bottles halfway across the world if they weigh a certain amount, or you have to pay for it, right? Because then there has to be like this carbon tax kind of concept, right, that comes into it. Because if you don't implement these kinds of things, then nothing will ever really change unless end consumers then all of a sudden have some kind of awakening where then they're super aware. But I don't see that coming, because that would require a lot of education. And I think, Andy, you are you're an educator for wine and spirits and drinks and whatnot, and maybe you can add something from your perspective of maybe the challenges of kind of just re-educating people or introducing the experiences from all of your years working to people.
Well, what I've found is, contrary to distributors' beliefs and marketing departments' beliefs, customers love this information. When they find out that the foil is excess packaging and they don't need it and it's easier to get into the bottle, they're into that. And when they find out that a heavier bottle doesn't mean better wine, like the same wine put into a light glass bottle versus a heavy glass bottle is the same quality wine. The glass doesn't have anything to do with it. So once they're informed, they're more empowered to make the decision. And I think because this is a law conference, I think it's great to hear that there's some restrictions on Deandra, in your side of the world on the weight of things and like taxes per gram of packaging and stuff like that. In the United States, you can put inexpensive products and very heavy packaging and just pass on the cost to the customer. And it's really on the producer to champion sustainability and less consumption. I want to throw some direction towards Tablas Creek in California. It's a company that's done so many pioneering things on importing grapes and increasing diversity in varietal for winemaking, but also more sustainable energy production in their winery. Recently, Tablas Creek chose to release a $95 3-liter bag-in-box. $95 for a 3-liter bag-in-box. 3 liters is 4 bottles of wine. So $95 over 4 bottles of wine. It's really not that much. And then you can expect to drink that over a month of time. So having 4 bottles of wine over a month, it's a rosé, and about $18 a bottle or so. And anyway, they sold out immediately. And Tablas Creek is...
I just want to jump in there really quick and make sure that it's obvious that the packaging of a bag in a box is actually really conducive to drinking it over a long period of time because of that oxidation factor that Andy was talking about earlier. When you pour wine out of a bag, it's vacuum sealed, so there's no oxygen that's introduced. The only weak point in a bag in a box is at the closure.
Yeah, that's an awesome point, Simmone. So a lot of people think about bag-in-box as being a low cost and therefore potentially low quality wine that is not that shelf stable, but the bag collapses on itself. And that's the issue. Like if you pour half a bottle of wine and then you save the half bottle, the headspace is full of oxygen, which is going to deteriorate the wine. And there's various ways that you could vacuum that out or displace it with an inert gas or put something in there to absorb some of the oxygen. But ultimately, if you have half your container full of not wine, that's not ideal. And the bag-in-box, the bag collapses on itself. So it's actually one of the best dispensing systems for wine, especially in in smaller amounts, non-750 ml increments. And we don't always need 750 mils of wine served at a time. So that's a great point. It's very shelf stable, especially at least over a month of time, if not longer. And if you put good quality wine in a bag-in-box, you'll get good quality wine out of the bag-in-box, generally with longer shelf life than a bottle. So Tablas Creek has done a great job of that. And I think it's interesting, the idea that the owner, operator, manufacturer, producer can champion this, but if they're not held to a certain standard, it's, at least in the United States, it's generally not happening. So for me, like a call to action is out on our social media platforms, or the people that we talk to when we have a wine that's put in a sustainable package, tell everybody that you love that. Like, I had a bottle of wine and it didn't have a foil and it was really good. And I had a can of wine and it was fantastic. And I love this winery because they work with live sustainably farmed grapes or biodynamically farmed grapes or organically farmed grapes. I love their practices and everybody should know about it, because wineries need to hear that that's what the customer wants. So
Double's Creek is doing a great job. Bag and Box is an excellent packaging option. If we tell wineries that we appreciate their sustainable efforts, they'll do more of it.
Yeah, I just want to jump in really quick and add something to that as well. Like there's a really cool natural wine producer in upstate New York. I'm trying to think, it's a little town that they're not even really in a town, they're in the middle of nowhere basically. It's called Wild Ark Farm, and they, you know, sell a lot in cans. And I visited them when I was in the US like 2 weeks ago. And it was like super cool to try. They have, you know, cans of piquette, they have cans of cider, they have cans of all of these kinds of things. But they also now are utilizing like a deposit bottle, which is then organized. I think it's a private company that does it, but you pay, you know, $2 per bottle to buy their wine, and then when you bring back the bottle, and you get another bottle, or you can get your $2 back, but basically transfers over, so then that these bottles are then going to be reused, you know, like 30 to 50 times, which already significantly reduces the CO2 footprint of that glass bottle itself. But they also sell their products on Patagonia. They have like, what do they call it? Like where you can buy like snacks and things to take with you when you're going camping and whatnot. And they also did like this partnership with Patagonia, which I think is like pretty cool, that Patagonia like reached out to them and was like, we want to have your wine in cans for our customers, which I think is like, maybe partnerships is also something that can really promote this idea, especially with a company like Patagonia that has, you know, a great image when it comes to social justice or sustainability or XYZ. So yeah, I thought that was also just maybe check it out and see what how they market it as well, because I think that's I think they sold out immediately once it was online.
So we've got about 5 minutes left, which is a lot of time actually. But before we close, I wanted to have an opportunity to share some like references and book suggestions and podcasts that I listen to. But I'm interested in Deandra and Simmone's suggestions. Before we move on to that, I wanted to, we've talked about reducing and reusing, and I want to talk about recycling real quickly, especially on the glass thing, because glass bottles are recyclable, but in many instances, they go into the landfill or not into another glass product. And this, I think this is a misunderstanding of a lot of folks, that because we have a glass bin, we put the bottles in there, they're going to turn into another glass bottle, right? Most of the time not. So I worked with a waste management company over the last decade plus. And I got to know them pretty well, and I gave them tours around the winery for their regional general managers, like all the upper management of this waste management company. And in 2017, when we transitioned to putting some wine in cans, I explained that to them, and they were so excited about it because aluminum cans have a great recycling stream, and aluminum is very recyclable. And there's a lot of added value in capturing aluminum and turning it back into aluminum products. The glass recycling system isn't great. We have a program to recycle some bottles, and particularly bottles with deposits on them are funneled into a waste stream that can be reused and reproduced into other glass things. Many wine bottles do not have a deposit on them. And there's a discussion in the wine industry, particularly in Oregon, to whether they're going to add a deposit to wine bottles. So as far as laws go, I think in this conference goes, this is something that's important that we pay attention to. Because most glass bottles, wine bottles that are recycled into asphalt, are recycled into construction site backfill, and in many cases they're landfilled because there's not a waste stream or a recycling stream that supports that. Something like 85% of wine bottles aren't turned into other glass products. It's atrocious. And this is in Oregon. In the Northwest, we have a very green focused, sustainably focused mindset for recycling. Outside of Oregon, outside of the Northwest, it's even a much bigger struggle. So I think that decreasing the weight of our glass, finding ways to reuse bottles and refill them is essential. Supporting the idea that we could add a deposit to wine bottles to improve the recycling stream is super important for me. I took a trip to outside of Oregon to a region, a wine producing region, and there was not glass bottle recycling. We packed it all back with us. We had like a case of wine bottles, and they all went